Christian Fraser there in Paris. Well, let's pick up on some of those things that Christian was talking about. Still with me here in the studio is Charles Lister, author of a new book, The Syrian Jihad. Syrian analyst Hassan, he's here too. He's co-author of ISIS Inside the Army of Terror. So confirmation, Abdelhamid Abaoud was killed in that raid. Charles, who was he getting his orders from? How did he get his weapons? How does it work?
Well, to be honest, it's really difficult to tell at the moment. I mean, there's two possible scenarios. This was a centrally directed plot, essentially ordered from Syria and coordinated by ISIL's senior leadership. The other scenario is that someone like Abaoud had returned to France and to Belgium, potentially with several other former ISIL militants or potentially not, and teamed up with others who were influenced by ISIL's ideology. But I don't think we necessarily have evidence either way yet. The implications of whether it is one or the other are potentially huge. If ISIL did centrally direct this plot from Syria and Iraq, then we are dealing with a different kind of threat from that group than we have done previously. And certainly they will have demonstrated a capability of centrally directing plots that we didn't previously sort of assess that they had.
Hassan, what went on with him, do you think? How was he programmed and dehumanized, him and the others, to commit the acts that they did?
Well, there was a story, before I explain that, there was a story today in the Wall Street Journal saying that Abaoud was actually a commander also of a field commander in Deir ez-Zor, managing a battle against the Assad regime. So he's a rare case of someone who has links to foreign cells and also to field operations inside Iraq and Syria. These people usually, before they come to Syria and Iraq, they already bought into the idea of ISIS, and the ideology is so galvanizing and illuminating and animating, as in the idea of a caliphate being built on the ground in Iraq and Syria. Appeals to a lot of people, a lot of young people. So when they join this group, they are programmed by saying that this is a group that needs. It's saying to its members that this is the only solution for Muslims to regain their glory and their power and supremacy in the world. So anything justifies the end. So violence becomes justifiable if you behead people and if you bomb civilians and so on. That is part of the ISIS strategy. So their strategy is based on two aspects: building a caliphate on the ground and carrying terrorist attacks against countries that they consider their enemies.
Charles, there seems to be a danger at the moment that the only group we're focusing on is Islamic State, that there needs to be a baddie and it's them. But the reality is, on the ground, there are many jihadist groups operating at the moment. How do these young men and women choose which group to align themselves with, and what are the differences between Islamic State, say, and Al-Qaeda? Sure.
Well, I think, in some cases, individuals who travel from the Western world and also from elsewhere in the Middle East and North Africa and further afield, in some cases, they don't always actually have an idea of who they want to join. Sometimes it's actually opportunistic, and certainly with regards to individuals I've spoken to in all of these kinds of organizations. Some of them have told me stories about how they just arrived in northern Syria and they just happened to end up joining one specific organization because they met someone on the border or they met someone in a local restaurant or whatever. On the other hand, there are many individuals who go specifically with the intention of joining specific organizations. I think probably what we've seen is an organization like ISIS has proven far more popular with regards to recruiting foreign fighters than perhaps has Al-Qaeda and other, there are at least 12 other small jihadist factions operating in Syria, most of whom are at least tacitly supportive of Al-Qaeda's cause. Those organizations don't get much coverage in the news, somewhat understandably so, because of attacks like what we've seen in Paris. But the potential long-term threat posed by some of those factions, and especially Al-Qaeda's official affiliate in Syria, may well actually be able to persist in terms of threatening the Western world much longer into the future than ISIS.
You're, I'm sure, referring to al-Nusra as well. Hassan, you have relatives, family in Syria. What do older people, parents, think about their young people going off and joining these groups and the future of those groups, and that we're hearing that al-Nusra might be there to stay, some say?
This is a very good question, especially with the now calls saying we need to just carpet bomb Raqqa and just get rid of ISIS. That misses the point. We have to, it's important to know that ISIS appeals to a very narrow audience, right? People who subscribe to this notion of either the political objective, the objective of ISIS, which is restoration of Sunni dominance in Iraq, or getting rid of what they consider sectarian government in Syria, or the ideology itself, that kind of the sort of Salafi jihadism that ISIS is more puritanical about than Al-Qaeda. Parents, families don't like that their sons even listen to ISIS, lectures, and they warn them. Even inside ISIS, territories, they can't publicly say, "Don't join ISIS," and so on. So what they do is basically at home, very quietly and they try to do whatever they can to prevent their sons drifting towards ISIS, and that's a very hard. It's a very tough thing to do in these areas. We have, it's important to understand that the majority of people are suspicious of ISIS. ISIS appeals to a very narrow audience.
One of the problems, surely, Charles, with ISIS is how wealthy they are. Some estimates say they're making $3 million a day from oil. Shouldn't it be a reasonably simple thing to try and cut off that revenue to them?
Sure. It's difficult. Countering ISIL's finance is particularly challenging because probably roughly 90 to 95% of ISIL's finances come from inside its area of control. It's that ISIL doesn't follow the traditional Al-Qaeda model of acquiring finance from outside, from external donations. The fact that it is, for example, the oil is the one that always gets the most attention. ISIL is smart. It uses civilians to transport, to extract, and to sell its oil, and ISIL takes a significant cut from the sales and from the extraction. The reason why that's so difficult is you've got civilians are the target. Most of these civilians are poor, they need to earn some kind of income, and so if you've got a civilian man driving an oil tanker for ISIL through eastern Syria, the dilemma for the international coalition is, well, do you carry out an airstrike and destroy those oil tankers, thereby killing civilians, or do you have to leave it to keep existing? I think another important point to bear in mind is that if anything, even more significant than the oil income is actually ISIL's ability to tax civilians under its control. ISIL has a very organized method of essentially assessing every single family's income and their household wealth, and they tax them every single week, every single family under their control, and it's a huge amount of money that they gain, and the only way of solving something like that is to definitively take back the territory that ISIL is under control of.
Well, Hassan, I wanted to give you the final word on what you think should happen militarily, because we've already discussed the wrong option could be absolutely catastrophic, and there's a bit of inaction at the moment. You don't think they should be carpet bombing Raqqa. Do you think that perhaps a combination of Sunni forces, Turkish, Saudi, other Gulf state troops going in, leading the way, could be a solution?
Well, the model that proved effective in Iraq was ground forces, local ground forces, operating as strikers on the ground while they get help from the air. That proved effective in preventing ISIS advances towards Baghdad, and expelling ISIS from Diyala, from Shia areas, but also from Kurdish areas. So the Kurds and the Shia proved very effective in defending their own area. Now the problem started to happen when these forces started to fight in Sunni areas, Sunni Arab areas, and that, that's obviously viewed as a threat, negatively by people living in these areas. So what you need is local forces working very effectively against ISIS, and the model also proved very effective in northern Syria, where ISIS was expelled in early 2014 from Idlib and much of Aleppo, and permanently expelled, as in ISIS did not go back to these areas. Why? Because these forces are Sunni organic groups that are committed to the fight against ISIS.
Hassan, Charles Lister, wonderful to have your thoughts today. This conversation will continue, I know. Thank you very much for being with us here on Global. Do stay with us, more to come, including scientists in China discover a superbug that's resistant to the strongest drugs available. So does it mean antibiotics will eventually become redundant?